You know that image of the Nativity, right? It's probably fixed in your mind, just like it is in mine. You can almost feel the gentle snow falling on a quiet little stable. You see the three kings, all in their royal robes, a silent, holy night. It's beautiful, no doubt. But what if I told you that history tells a completely different and, frankly, a much wilder story?
Jesus wasn't born on December 25th? And why did the whole world get it wrong? That's the question we're diving into. Because that peaceful little nativity scene you have in your living room, the one we've built these incredible traditions around, well, it isn't really a historical record. It's what you might call a great misunderstanding.
Now hold on, this is not about ruining Christmas. Far from it. This is about peeling back the layers of tradition to recover the real story. And let me tell you, the real story is so much better. It's a gritty, dangerous thriller that involves sorcerers, a paranoid king, and a divine timing that changes absolutely everything. So let's open up the historical files and separate the fairy tale from the facts. All right, so our investigation is going to start with the most obvious clue, one that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time: the weather.
The Bible is actually super specific here. In Luke chapter 2, it says, "There were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night." Now that little phrase, out in the field, that's our first huge piece of evidence.
Okay, so let's just think about the geography for a second. In Bethlehem, December is the peak of the rainy season. At night, the temperatures drop to near freezing. We're talking 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It is cold, it is wet, and it is miserable. So you have to ask yourself, would a shepherd really leave his valuable flock? I mean, this is his entire livelihood, out in the freezing rain all night long. Common sense says no way. And you know what? History backs that up. The Jewish Mishnah, which is this ancient record of oral law, it clearly states that flocks were always brought in from the fields no later than the end of October. They had to protect them from the harsh winter. So here's the bottom line. If shepherds were camping outside with their flocks, it is meteorologically impossible for it to have been December. It had to be a warmer, drier season. So if it wasn't winter, then when was it? Well, the answer isn't just a guess. It's actually a mathematical calculation hidden right in the Gospels, in the story of a priest named Zechariah. And this just builds our case even more. Okay, hang with me on this because it's a little bit like a math problem, but it's so cool. Luke chapter 1 tells us that Zechariah was a priest from the division of Abijah. Now, thanks to temple records, we know that this specific division served its shift around June. Simple enough, right? So if Zechariah finishes his duties in June and his wife Elizabeth conceives John the Baptist right after, you count forward 9 months, and boom, John would be born around March or April, right around the time of Passover. Now here's the kicker. The Gospel says that the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary when Elizabeth was already 6 months pregnant. So let's do the math. You take John's conception, add 6 months, and then add 9 more months for Mary's pregnancy, and where do you land? September or October. And this is where the timing just gets mind-blowingly profound. See, a birth in September or October lines up perfectly with the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles. So when John 1:14 says, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us," the original Greek word for dwelt is skinoa. And you know what that literally means? It means to pitch a tent. He came to pitch a tent, to tabernacle, to camp out with humanity during the Festival of Shelters. It wasn't random. It was a divine appointment. So, this brings us to the big question, doesn't it? If the weather evidence and the mathematical evidence both point to an autumn birth, then why on earth do we celebrate on December 25th? Well, the answer to that isn't in the Bible. It's in Roman politics. For this, we have to travel back to the 4th century Roman Empire. And you'll see that the early church didn't make a mistake. They made an absolutely brilliant strategic move. Back in the 4th century, Roman winter was party central for massive pagan festivals. You had Saturnalia, which was just this week-long festival of chaos and debauchery. And then specifically on December 25th, they celebrated something called Sol Invictus, which means the birthday of the unconquered sun, marking the day the sun started to return after the winter solstice. The early church leaders saw a massive opportunity here. They decided to hijack the date to redeem it. They replaced the worship of the SUN God with the worship of the SON of God. They basically planted a flag and declared, "Oh, you celebrate the return of the sun? That's cute. We celebrate the arrival of the true light of the world." December 25th isn't a biological birthday. It's a victory flag. It's a symbol of light conquering darkness. But listen, knowing the correct date is only half the story.
The real power, the real gut punch, comes from understanding what actually went down that night. It wasn't a peaceful, silent night. It was a thriller.
So let's start with the first guests. We sing We Three Kings, but the Bible calls them Magi. And you know who they were? They weren't Jewish believers. They were Persian sorcerers, astrologers, guys who practiced magic, things that were explicitly forbidden by Jewish law. Just think about that irony for a second. The religious leaders right there in Jerusalem completely missed all the signs, but God invites these unclean foreigners from 900 miles away to be the very first witnesses. It's wild.
But their arrival, it triggers a complete nightmare. See, we often forget the villain of the Christmas story, King Herod the Great. This guy was such a paranoid tyrant that he had his own wife and 3 of his own sons executed just because he thought they were a threat to his power. So when this guy hears whispers of a new king, he doesn't prepare a gift, he orders a massacre.
And this is the real story. It wasn't a silent night. It was a night of raw survival. It was Joseph and Mary grabbing their young son and running for their lives in the middle of the night, crossing the border into Egypt to escape a genocide. Jesus began his life on this earth as a refugee, seeking asylum in a foreign land. He wasn't born into the safety of a palace. He was born right into the crosshairs of a political thriller.
So does knowing all of this ruin the holiday? For me, it saves it. It makes it real. Because, look, we don't need some fairy tale God who lives in a perfect little snow globe untouched by our problems. We need a God who gets it. A God who understands what it's like to be homeless, to be hunted, to be an outsider. We need a real God for our very real, very messy world.
Hey, if you learned something new today, would you do me a favor and hit that like button? It really does tell the algorithm that people are hungry for this kind of historical deep dive. And I really want to hear from you in the comments. Does knowing that Jesus was a refugee, does that make you feel closer to him? Let me know down below, just a simple yes or no. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell, because in our next explainer, we are tackling the most controversial symbols of all, Santa Claus and the Christmas tree. Are they just harmless fun, or are they ancient idols the Bible actually warns us against? You do not want to miss that investigation. This is God Feeds Me.